Even though CMMC itself is concerned only with protecting CUI, conceptually, that includes fantastic cybersecurity best practices that organizations could implement throughout their entire organizations, not just on the systems that store, process, or transmit CUI.
Welcome to the latest episode of Unraveling IT, Expert Tech Talks. I'm Daniel Goffen, VP of Sales here at Corsica Technologies, and today I'm sitting down with our Chief Information Security Officer, Ross Filipek, to talk about CMMC 2.0. What is it? Why compliance is important, and what resources are out there to help companies navigate this process. Ross, just to start us out here, what is the cybersecurity maturity model certification, and why is that important to manufacturers and distributors?
It's a great question, and one that many organizations have right at the moment. So CMMC is the cybersecurity framework that the United States Department of Defense is requiring that all its contractors abide by. So you could think of CMMC as sort of a long list of individual cybersecurity requirements. I mean, there are technical things, there are administrative and procedural requirements, but basically a large collection of requirements that contractors are going to have to demonstrate that they satisfy in order to be eligible to bid on contracts to work for the DoD.
So can you explain a little bit more in detail the different levels of CMMC and how each specific level has different requirements?
So CMMC version 2, which is what the proposed version of the CMMC framework is currently, is organized into three different levels, levels 1, 2, and 3. So from the bottom, level 1, you could kind of think of this as a baseline sort of cybersecurity posture, includes very basic requirements. In fact, it's intended for contractors who are going to be working with something called FCI, or Federal Contract Information, exclusively. So if you're a DoD contractor and you know that you don't work with any CUI or controlled unclassified information, you only work with FCI, chances are pretty good that you're going to be targeting that level 1 for compliance. So pretty light lift with that. In fact, there are 15 requirements that go along with level 1, pretty easy for most organizations to attain. Level 2, which is where almost all DoD contractors are going to land, is intended for organizations that are actually working with CUI, controlled unclassified information. This is the type of data that most contractors who are going to be in the scope of CMMC are either storing or processing or transmitting or interacting with in some capacity. So with level 2 CMMC compliance, there are actually 110 individual requirements that those contractors are going to have to meet. And those 110 requirements are all spelled out in a document called NIST Special Publication 800-171. It's freely available online. You'll pull up the document and it's got all 110 requirements in there. Like I mentioned, almost all DoD contractors are going to fall into that level 2 compliance category. Level 3 CMMC compliance is really reserved for contractors who are going to be working with highly sensitive types of information that really go above and beyond the protections that are required at level 2. With level 3, you've still got all 110 of those NIST 800-171 requirements, but then we also add around 30 additional requirements that are cataloged in NIST 800-172. Basically, these levels all build on one another, but almost all DoD contractors are going to fall into that level 2 categorization.
Where do I start? Let's say that I'm a DoD contractor or even a subcontractor working with a large governmental privatized organization like Boeing. Where do I start? How do I assess where I'm at within the level 2 CMMC framework?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So the first thing you need to do is get an understanding about what level of CMMC compliance the contracts that you want to bid on are going to require. So in other words, when the DoD goes to issue an RFP, so they can get bids for that contract. In that RFP, they're going to clearly say prospective bidders need to be certified at CMMC, level 1 or level 2 or level 3 or whatever that is. So what we need to do as contractors is try to get an understanding about what level of compliance is going to be required of us so that we can be eligible to bid on the RFPs that we want to bid on. In addition, a lot of contractors already know whether they're storing or processing or transmitting CUI. CUI, in theory, is all already supposed to be labeled as such when it's received from the DoD or from whatever organization is supplying that information. So, yeah, this can be in the form of like a watermark on a document or metadata in an electronic file. But it should clearly say CUI or controlled unclassified information or something to that effect.
Has there been any timeline of when this regulation is going to be strictly required? And has that timeline moved? What does that look like in the marketplace today?
Yes, some of you may remember a number of years ago, we started out with the original CMMC, which was tabled and kind of reworked into this CMMC version 2. Currently, we are in what's called the proposed phase of CMMC version 2. So in late December last year, 2023, the Department of Defense released what's called the CMMC version 2 proposed rule. And in that document, they talked about all the requirements that they are proposing to require if CMMC version 2 were to go into effect. So the idea behind that, issuing that proposed rule is that they wanted to give contractors and other stakeholders an opportunity to read those proposed rulings and give them a chance to comment and provide feedback. And all those comments are things that the DoD takes into consideration as they draft what's called the CMMC final ruling. The final rule is targeted to be released either late 2024 or early 2025, but we don't have a firm date on that yet. So until the final ruling comes down, CMMC, is still technically in just a proposed phase rather than an enforceable phase.
But we do feel like that there's going to be a hard and fast ruling on this very soon, and that this will be a strict business requirement. Is that correct?
It will be, yeah. So it's not going to be effective from day one. It's not like January 1st, the DoD is going to say, okay, well, here's the final ruling. From this point on, every prospective bidder has to, have already been certified at CMMC level 2. There's going to be a ramp up period allowed just because all of these contractors are going to have to go schedule CMMC audits with organizations called C3PAOs. Those are the organizations that are accredited to do formal CMMC audits. So yeah, contractors are going to have to go out and find a C3PAO auditor, schedule their audits, have the auditor come in, do the audit, issue the certification. And there are a lot of contractors. There are relatively few C3PAOs. So that process is going to take a little bit of time.
That's interesting. Let's say that I'm a contractor, manufacturer, distributor, and I'm a small to medium-sized business, and I want to assess what I have today. Do we have any resources that could potentially help with that?
Absolutely. So Corsica provides what we call CMMC gap assessments. So we are already confident that the core framework for CMMC version 2, level 2, is going to be that NIST special publication 800-171. That's been out for quite a while. So we help organizations assess their own posture, the way that they're currently storing, processing, transmitting CUI against that NIST 800-171 framework. And through that process, we could identify, which requirements they are compliant with and which requirements we need to figure out, ways to fix or ways to improve our processes so that we can become compliant with them. So even though CMMC is not a final ruling yet, we've still got plenty of information that we can use to be improving our own processes and our own technologies to put us in a better position to pass our audit once the final ruling is issued.
So once you've had that initial audit, the final ruling has been in effect for some time. Do you think that the requirements are going to change over time? Is this going to be a moving goalpost, or is this something where I've put the policies, procedures, and controls in place. I have the security risk measured on a annual or semi-annual basis. I'm good to go. What do you think is the future impact of this?
Yeah. So if there's one thing we know about the cyber threat landscape is it changes every day, right? So I would very much count on CMMC not being a static type of regulation, at least not in the long-term context. I would expect new requirements to be added to CMMC over time, and then organizations here are going to have to continually be re-audited and make sure they keep up to date with compliance with everything that's required.
So knowing that cybersecurity is a moving goalpost, does CMMC, the concept of it, help contractors more than just the CMMC compliance? Is there a attitude about cybersecurity that's shifting in the landscape by adopting this NIST best practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. So even though CMMC itself is concerned only with how an organization is protecting CUI, conceptually, that NIST 800-171 framework includes fantastic, cybersecurity best practices that organizations could readily take and implement throughout their entire organizations, not just on the systems that store, process, or transmit CUI. So if you're an organization and you have not already adopted some type of cybersecurity framework, basically like cybersecurity roadmap, if you will, that you're working towards to make sure you're as well protected as possible. Yeah, the NIST 800-171 framework is really a fantastic resource that can be adapted for really just general cybersecurity best practices that are applicable to the entire organization.
Switching gears here for a second, how long on average does this process take? Obviously, it's going to depend on where you're coming from, but from initial investigation of what you have, policies, procedures, an assessment of the gaps, how long does it take to implement and be fully in certification of those 110 controls?
That's going to vary quite widely, and it really just depends on, as an organization, how familiar are you with exactly how you are currently storing, processing, transmitting, using CUI. If you're really on top of that and you understand very clearly what systems are involved in the processing of CUI in some capacity, and you know exactly how that information flows around your environment, you are going to be able to much more quickly capture the evidence, to show the auditor what he or she is going to want to see and build your documentation, your system security plan, and so forth. Conversely, if you're in a position where, you say, well, I don't even know if we have CUI or not, and you have to undertake, sort of a deep dive throughout the environment, that can really add a lot of time to the process. So really, the more you know about your own environment, the quicker the process is.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Are there specific categories within CMMC that matter? And if there are, what are they?
So there are numerous categories of CUI. So CUI, you could kind of think as sort of a high level label for types of information that need to be protected, but maybe not to the degree that they would be considered, secret information or classified information, or, something that is a higher security level. So CUI, you could kind of think of it as occupying the space between classified information and public information. I mean, there are a lot more, as far as the government's concerned, a lot more, classification labels between those. But
well, I'm thinking about like user security training, user awareness training. Is there certain categories that fit into standard cybersecurity frameworks and best practices?
Yeah, like I was saying a couple of minutes ago, taking that NIST 800-171 framework, which contains all the specific requirements that are written to make sure you're protecting CUI. Any organization could extrapolate those to expand the scope beyond CUI and just say any sensitive data, for instance, that the organization is entrusted with protecting. We need to train our users about how to recognize that, about how to protect it. We need to train them to not email it out to external recipients, not to print it out and, leave it sitting on the printer for anybody to walk up and pick up the paper. So yeah, all of that translates very well towards an organization just really expanding the scope to their entire environment.
So Ross, for anyone listening, what are the next steps if they're just getting started in the process or they're quite a ways through that they could take to potentially benefit themselves and learn more?
Yeah, another great question. So there are fortunately a lot of tools that are commercially available that an organization can use to assist with performing a CMMC gap assessment. So these are generally software as a service platform type offerings where you create an account, you log in, it's going to take you through all those 110 controls and give you the opportunity to, write a description of how you are accomplishing that, attach evidence to demonstrate that you're accomplishing that requirement. So for organizations who are, think they'd be self-sufficient for doing that, by all means, it's, if you've got the resources to do it, that's a great thing to get started on. However, we do have a lot of clients and other organizations that come to us for assistance with that process. So certainly Corsica can help you as an organization walk through that process and guide you in every step of the way.
Ross, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. And anyone listening in, feel free to contact us as well. Always willing to help. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.